Good morning, everyone. In this blog, I'm going to talk about how you can become a narcissist repellent, how you can avoid getting into relationships with narcissists. And I've discussed a few different times in these blogs, who is usually very attractive, a juicy morsel for a narcissist. And usually those are codependents and empaths. Narcissists tend to seek out people that have a high level of empathy. There are also people that tend to feel overly responsible for other people's actions and behaviors, so they tend to take on that responsibility. A narcissist, because they cannot take responsibility for their own actions or behaviors or harms that they cause others, they need a recipient. They need a recipient that's willing to be somewhat, I would say, in delusion and accept responsibility for other people's problems. And that's your codependent. Codependents think everything is their fault, and they take on more responsibility than is rightfully theirs. And so they're like this perfect toxic dance between a narcissist and a codependent. They do this, and we could call it the narcissist or the narc codependent tango. How do you become a repellent for narcissists or toxic people? Well, it's pretty simple. You learn how to say no. You learn how to set clear, healthy boundaries for yourself, and you learn to engage in self-honoring, self-loving, self-caring behaviors. And if you grew up in either a neglectful, toxic, or abusive home environment, these things do not come easily to you. I've sort of gone over this a few times, but with the codependent, their sort of adaptation or what they learned from the trauma of their childhood or from the attachment, that attachment bond that was sort of broken in their childhood, is they learned that their primary caregiver was sort of unreliable, inconsistent, depressed, or whatever it was. And the adaptation the codependent learns is, I have this unreliable caregiver. I need to be, more loving, more giving, more adaptable, more agreeable. And so when they learn that sort of strategy in order to cope in their existence, they grow up as an adult and they sort of replicate that same thing. And so how can you make yourself very unattractive to sort of people that are predatory or narcissistic or wanting to take advantage of others? Well, I would never suggest that you tone down your empathy, because honestly, the fact that you have like this incredibly empathetic heart is rad, and you should never have to dim your light for other people. But what I will suggest is that you learn that there are certain people that you can shine your light with, and others that you just need to avoid. And that's a beautiful thing to learn, that the ones in your life that are supposed to be there are the ones that let your bright light shine fully. And that's a gorgeous thing, I think. But let's get back to how to be a repellent for the narcissist. Well, learn how to say no. In the beginning stages of the relationship with a narcissist, they do what's called love bombing. And they basically, when you're in that relationship, you feel like you can do no wrong, and they put you up on a pedestal and they idealize you, and they get to know everything there is to know about you. And you'll notice though, so codependents tend to also be very likely to sort of share their innermost selves with maybe almost anyone. So that's one thing that you can learn how to do, is be much more discerning and selective about who you sort of share or your inner thoughts or be vulnerable with. And there are lots of people in this world that you are safe to be vulnerable with, and you probably know them. They're probably your friends, and you're safe. But that is a privilege that is earned, and you're not obligated to barf your whole life story onto somebody that you just met. So that's one thing, is you can learn how to be a lot more selective about who you allow allow yourself to be vulnerable with. That's one way. Another way is, during that love bombing stage, if you notice, if you think back on, if you were in a relationship with a narcissist and you think back, usually it was pretty one way. So typically the empath or the codependent is, sort of sharing themselves and being very vulnerable, and the narcissist is listening and, sort of appearing to be very, thoughtful and observant and sort of listening, and you feel like, oh wow, I'm really being listened to. This person really understands me. But the thing to note is that the narcissist is usually not sharing themselves with you. So that's something to notice. Like, hey, is this a relationship one of give and take? Am I sharing a little bit and being vulnerable, and then that other person is sharing a little bit and being vulnerable, and it's sort of reciprocity, and that's happening, and that's sort of how you build this intimacy. Well, if you look back on the relationship, or at least I can from my personal experience, I look back on the relationship and I realize that sort of sharing, vulnerability, disclosing sort of your inner self was very one-sided in my relationship. I was the one being brave enough to do that, and I was with somebody who wasn't. So that's something to notice. And then they typically test your boundaries in the beginning, and I can say, again, in my personal experience with the covert narcissist, I believe is a covert narcissist, I had very porous boundaries in the beginning of the relationship. I was newly sober. I didn't even understand what boundaries were. And so, I would try to set them, but then I wouldn't even be able to stick to my own boundaries, and he certainly didn't. So they sort of manage your expectations down, and to a point where, usually, at least in my experience, I was like sustaining on like crumbs. And it was a very slow, insidious, subtle process, but that is what ended up happening. And so, to be a narcissist repellent, learn to say no. Learn to engage in self-honoring behaviors. Understand that no is a complete sentence. There's a bunch of stuff on the internet on really nice ways to say no. One really nice way to say no is, hey, thank you so much for asking me. I've thought about your request and it's not going to work for me right now. Or, thanks so much for asking me. Let me think about that and get back to you. And then you can get back to them and you can say, that's not going to work at this time. Or just that's not going to work for me, Or just, you can even just say no, or no thank you, or thanks for thinking of me, but no. I mean, these are just healthy ways that you can learn how to say no. And if you say no to somebody and they act like a jerk, that's a red flag, something to notice, because healthy people are respectful of other people's boundaries. Or at least they try to be, and they're learning. Not everyone has this all dialed in. I'm no ninja. I'm learning all of this stuff myself. Part of sharing this with you guys is my journey of learning, like, how to say no, how to set boundaries. Also, how to learn in relationships to, meet somebody halfway and not fill in the gaps. So another way you'll notice, if you're dealing with a narcissist, is that, codependents typically will, they'll do more work than is their fair share. And quite frankly, that's sort of, if you're the codependent, that's sort of on you. Like, I definitely did that. I filled in the gaps. I kept working harder and harder and harder on this relationship, and here this person wasn't meeting me halfway. They weren't even meeting me 10% of the way. Of course, during the love bombing stage, it appeared that they were, but the reality is, as the relationship progressed, I was doing more and more and more and more, and almost blind to the fact that this person wasn't. But so for the codependent, part of your journey is to learn how to not give so much, not be a pathological giver. It's awesome to give. That's beautiful. That's part of what makes your heart so awesome, and your generosity is so great. But you've got to learn how that it's give and take, and you need to, meet people halfway and let them meet you halfway. And don't overfunction in relationships. Don't try to fix other people. That is their job. Your job is to fix yourself. Keep the focus on yourself. Do self-care. be engaged in self-honoring behaviors, set healthy boundaries for yourself, stick to your own boundaries, and set healthy boundaries with others. So I don't know if this is helpful for you, but this has all been part of sort of my healing journey from trying to recover from being in an 11-year relationship with a covert narcissist. And for some reason, me being able to share this with you, it helps me. So thanks for letting me be of service, and thank you for helping me.